This is a story of the Quest Gamma Ray. Building and flying this rocket was my first venture away from Estes rocket kits. Eventually, I built and flew many more Quest rockets as well as other brands. That might not have come true if the Quest Gamma Ray was not a well-made rocket kit. Outwardly, the Gamma Ray seems very similar to the old Estes X-Ray I built in the 1970s, but it replaces the balsa nose cone and transition section with plastic, and the payload tube is translucent red. The Gamma Ray kit was supplied with 3 fairly thick and sturdy swept balsa fins. It uses Kevlar and braided wrapped elastic for the shock cord, and it is mounted to the motor mount. I painted it with high-gloss Testors metallic red and added silver stick-on decals supplied with the kit. I used extra pieces of silver to further decorate the Gamma Ray with trim around the motor end and a roll pattern just above the fins. I had to add a lot of nose weight to balance this model on a string stability test. I glued it into the nose cone so I still have the full use of the payload bay, where I added vent holes for a barometric altimeter from Jolly Logic. The Quest Gamma Ray uses a motor clip to hold 18mm motors from 1/2 A to C power. It uses wadding for parachute protection. It weighed 48 grams when completed, to which I added 0.4 grams of padding and the 7-gram altimeter. Flight weight is 55.4 grams, not including the motor. The Gamma Ray measures 18 1/4 inch tall, or 46.4 centimeters. It has a 24mm body tube that transitioned down to 20mm. The 2-inch long interior payload space has 1.33 cubic inches of volume. The fins have a circular span of 4 inches, or 10.2 centimeters. The rocket was completed in December 2010. I learned to use a smaller parachute than the supplied 14-inch chute. Even with 18 grams of payload and nose weight, and a 1.5-inch spill hole cut into the chute, it still descends at only 5 miles per hour, allowing the wind to carry it pretty far. I now typically use a 10 or 12-inch parachute. I have flown this to an altitude of 897 feet, higher than the Renaissance Tower in Dallas and the Charlotte Bank of America Corporate Center. Its first flight came on May 29, 2011, in light winds, using an A83 motor. It was a perfect flight. Since I did not have a charged altimeter battery, I estimate it attained about 99 feet. This was followed by a B-64 flight later in that day, where the altimeter read 360 feet. It too was a perfect flight, and did not drift very far. Later, on July 2nd of that same year, using a C65 motor, it reached an altitude of 803 feet, and sailed out of sight for a while before I could spot it. The flight and recovery was a complete success. I then flew another AA-3 powered flight to get an altimeter reading of 112 feet. Again on September 3rd, I flew it 3 more times in light to moderate winds with a B-64 motor. This was a test of the repeatability of the altimeter and the rocket itself for consistent flying ability. The first flight took it to 390 feet and returned with a good recovery. For the second flight, the wind picked up to about 10 to 12 miles per hour. The rocket weathercocked quite a lot during the coast, and by the time the ejection fired, it was traveling horizontally to an apogee of 326 feet. Again, it had a good recovery. Already, it showed me the wind is a much greater factor in affecting the height than any altimeter error which may exist. This series of tests would have been more informative in zero-wind conditions. The third flight measured 361 feet. Not as high as the first 390-foot measurement, but at least the wind didn't turn it into the wind. So far, I've had 7 flights, all with a good parachute and a perfect recovery. The Gamma Ray never gave me any trouble, until the next flight on October 8th. I flew it with a B-64 motor, and the new Altimeter 2 replaced the older Altimeter 1. I cut a spill hole in the parachute to get less drift. Instead, I got a plastic wad for recovery, even though I packed it carefully, and repacked it on a hunch that it just wasn't right. As it was falling rapidly, I thought it wasn't going to end well for the Gamma, but at least I'll get some interesting flight data and recovery speed. But I got nothing. The data was blank. I estimated it reached about 360 feet. This rocket, with its thick fins, landed in the grass intact, but I'll call this test flight a failure. I later learned the new Altimeter 2 was different than the Altimeter 1 in that it was triggered by a hard acceleration. Previously, using the Altimeter 1, I never had to handle it gently after arming. The last two flights for 2011 was on November 25th. First flight was with the B-64. I expected maybe mid-300 feet with this motor, but on this cool, breezy day it reached 381 feet. I did not expect it would reach 98 miles per hour. Even with a 1.5-inch spill hole, the 5-mile-per-hour descent took over 45 seconds and landed close by. The second flight used an AA-3 motor. This flight only reached 47 miles per hour and 99 feet of apogee. A nearly perfect ejection time sounded very powerful from the ground, making a distinctive pop. A post-flight inspection revealed the body tube above the fins almost split along a spiral seam, and the body tube was a bit soft in that area. It apparently was a very powerful ejection charge. The 2012 year for the Gamma Ray started on a gusty April Fool's Day. An AA-3 motor pushed it to 99 feet with barely any effect from the wind. The chute ejected, but did not open. The rocket fell the 100 feet at 27 miles per hour. The total flight was only 6.1 seconds. Since it was about 50 degrees, I didn't think it was too cold for a plastic parachute. I flew it again with a B-64. A B-64 is more ideal, but with the stronger, gusty winds, I expected it to weathercock and not fly so high. With no strong gust at the time, the Gamma Ray continued up to 366 feet at ejection, then peaked at 375 feet. Again, the parachute failed to open, and the craft returned at 22 miles per hour, landing undamaged in the grass.
Wow, that came down in a hurry.
It seems clear in hindsight that 50 degrees is too cold for the thicker Quest parachutes. Later, in May of 2012, I had replaced the somewhat stiff Quest parachute for an Estes 12-inch parachute. I loaded a C-67 for a flight on a hot, humid day in 5-mile-per-hour winds. It was previously up with a C-65 and reached just over 800 feet. Being that high, I couldn't judge the best delay time. The new altimeter would record the ejection timing, and I could then see what was ideal. It reached a speed of 167 miles per hour and an altitude of 897 feet. The flight duration was 69.5 seconds. This was a new speed, altitude, and duration record for the Gamma Ray, and the new parachute worked very well. These records still stand today in 2018, 6 years later. On June 10th, it flew again. It was nearly calm. Today, it would run on a B-66. It flew straight up. Most of my Estes motors have had short delay times. This one was 5.1 seconds, but was within the published tolerances. 5 seconds was nearly perfect. After reaching an apogee of 370 feet, it only fell 7 feet and deployed a good parachute that fell at 10 miles per hour for a soft landing only about 150 feet from the launch pad. Post-flight inspection uncovered a broken shroud line on the parachute. Nearly perfect, but not quite. The break was not at the canopy attachment as expected, but in the middle of the string where apparently the line had been frayed and weakened. After 14 flights, the Gamma Ray would get a rest for the year. The following year, May 4th, 2013, it flew again. Previous flights showed it could fly best with a B-66, so that is what was used. This year, it sported a new homemade parachute replacing the Estes chute. This flight reached an apogee of 360 feet, and with a slightly short delay time, it deployed a good chute with extra long shroud lines and returned it to Earth at a gentle 6 miles per hour. This was the fourth perfect flight of the day. While carrying the rocket back, my wife asked, "How high do you think it went?" I remembered my prediction of 370 feet and said, "They are flying a little lower than predicted, so I'll say about 360 feet. I removed the altimeter, looked at it, and smiled, and turned it so she could read the LCD. 360. That was Gamma's only flight that year. The Gamma flew again on the 45th anniversary of the landing on the moon. This flight would employ a B-64 and a very tiny 10-inch chute with a spill hole. My concern for the strong wind swayed me to a small chute and a shorter delay time. Although in hindsight, a 6-second delay would have been fine. It peaked out at 362 feet, descended at 10 miles per hour, and was home within half a minute. The Gamma Ray then got a long break, almost 2 years long, before flying again. It was a pretty calm day, severely clear skies, and I waited a long time for a flying day like this. I sent the Gamma Ray on a mission with a C-67 to try for a new altitude record. The Ray has flown with a C-6 twice before, but only once with the longer 7-second delay. It reached a peak of 146 miles per hour, then coasted up for 6.2 seconds, and peaked at 845 feet. The small parachute brought it back at 11 miles per hour, after just short of a full minute of flight. No records were broken, but it was a satisfying flight that flew straight up and beyond visible range before returning safely to the ground. This same day, I made another attempt at maximum with another C-67 motor. Seeing this and other rockets land close by, I was certain there were no strong winds aloft. This flight had a longer burn time of 2.1 seconds. It reached an identical maximum speed of 146 miles per hour. It reached an apogee of 860 feet. Another well-timed ejection came after the rocket lost only 6 feet, and I was able to keep track of it from the tracking smoke against a clear blue sky. The flight was a complete success as it flew fast, straight, and high, and was only 1/10 of a second short of a full minute. I flew it again in 2016 on September 3rd. On this day, it was gusty with winds of about 10 miles per hour. With an AA-3, I only expected a flight to about 100 feet, so I gave it the larger parachute this time. It flew with a top speed of only 34 miles per hour, the slowest on record for this Gamma Ray. It did turn into the wind a bit, but not too much. The apogee was at 122 feet, a surprise for me since this was the highest A8 flight for the Gamma Ray. At this time, the Gamma Ray has completed 19 flights and is the third most flown rocket in my arsenal. The other two rockets with more flights were those built in the 1970s. So this is my most flown rocket I've built since my born-again Rocketeer days started. I fully intend to continue flying this rocket from time to time. The only thing holding me back is that I have since built a number of other rockets that need to be flown. So many rockets, so little time. The Quest Gamma Ray has proved to be a tough little rocket and a good flyer with predictable results. Even with no parachute, it can survive a fast landing, and it has a good reach toward the clouds. It has flown higher than the Renaissance Tower in Dallas, Texas, and about twice as high as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and more than 3 times as high as the U.S. Capitol building in D.C. It just might be that its performance is due to the metallic paint and extra shiny silver trim. The Quest Gamma Ray Payloader.